Hi, welcome to Monster Transmissions. Today you're in Curt's Corner, and we're going to go over how to replace the linkage on an E4OD or a 4R100 transmission. It's the same on either transmission, and I'll go through the whole process on how you replace the linkage. When you get a Monster transmission, the linkage we have in the unit is for testing, so it may not match your vehicle exactly. So we'll go through the process of how you can exchange the linkage from your original transmission and install into the Monster transmission. So the first thing is, here's the mechanical linkage on the transmission here. Obviously the new switch has not been installed yet, but what we're going to do is we're going to roll the transmission over. You have to remove the transmission pan and the filter, and then we'll start working on removing the linkage assembly. It sounds complex, but the hardest part is taking the 20 pan bolts off. Other than that, it's a roll pin and a 13/16 nut. It's that simple. So we'll go through with changing the linkage on this E4OD. First, you're going to remove all 20 pan bolts. If you're taking apart your original unit, make sure you have a place, because all the fluid's going to want to dump out if you haven't already dropped the pan. So remove the 20 pan bolts and then remove the filter. Remove the pan and the gasket. Most gaskets with E4OD 4R100 are reusable gasket, so that shouldn't be a problem. And you're going to remove this filter. It's just pushed into the pump assembly. So you just twist it left and right and pull it out. Ensure that the seal for the filter comes off with the filter and will be installed the same way. Now it's exposed the linkage assembly. Okay, so this is your manual valve for your linkage, manual valve for the valve body. And this is the linkage mechanism itself, and it has a tensioner. And that's a 15/16 or 8 millimeter. You're going to loosen that tensioner. Now be very careful. You don't want to lose that bolt down into the transmission. So you're going to remove this tensioner. And now we're going to remove this nut. It's 13/16. Again, the same as the linkage nut. Be careful, linkage bolt. You want to make sure you don't drop this nut down inside the transmission. Now this linkage is loose from the manual valve. It's off the end of the shaft here. So there's one more item to remove, and there's a roll pin pressed into the case here. A lot of times this roll pin is recessed into this cavity in the casting of the case. And what we normally use is either 2 small flat blade screwdrivers, and you put one on either side of the roll pin. On either side. You wedge it in that cavity and pry, lifting. That action of lifting will pull that pin forward, allow you enough to take needle nose or small dikes, something to slide this roll pin out of the case. Now the linkage shaft is free. We'll simply take the linkage shaft out of the unit, and we're going to replace it with the factory one that the customer needs. And what you want to do first, slide this thing so you can go up and down, and there's a groove here in the linkage. This is the groove that the roll pin slides into. That will prevent the linkage from walking back and forth, and it can pivot because it has the same groove around the entire manual linkage shaft. So you can slide this down, set the pin in there, and you just want to gently tap this down just to where it's about flush. So now the linkage is free. Make sure it could spin freely. You don't want to put it on top of the side of the shaft. You don't have to hammer it hard. Now you're going to line up the linkage assembly itself, and the linkage assembly on the bottom has 2 flat lands, one on either side. And it doesn't matter where it goes, it's going to line up. The 2 flat lands will line up with the 2 flat areas of the linkage assembly. Put that over the shaft, reinstall the nut, and before you install the nut all the way, you want to make sure that the manual shift rod, this shaft, is in the first channel on the manual valve. Now you can reinstall the tensioner, And the way this will fit back into the case, it has a roll mechanism for the bottom of the linkage shaft. You want this roll mechanism facing this linkage or facing you. And the other side of the linkage, it has a tab. That tab actually fits in this hole in the casting of the case. And the bolt will go through the linkage tensioner and into that threaded casting portion of the case. And now it's tightened in the back of the case. Verify that the roller is lined up with the linkage assembly and works properly. So now the linkage is properly installed on the unit. So now all you have to do is reinstall the filter and reinstall the pan. Now I'm going to grease up and reinstall the filter into the casting of the pump. Should line up in this position, and then you can reinstall the pan. And there, now we have the new linkage installed in the transmission. But if you have any further tech questions here at Monster, give us a call toll free, 1-800-708-0087, and all of our Texas salespeople will be glad to help you. Thanks and have a great day.